I'm Arthur Boyd. I'm a designer. We're in my studio at the moment where I live and work. Currently leading up to my second capsule collection, which is titled Barflies, which I'm showing at reference points during London Fashion Week, but independently off the schedule.
Can you tell me about how you got into fashion?
Sure. My mum taught me the basics when I was about 11 of how to thread up the machine. Actually, this machine, which is the one that she made her wedding dress on. And she's still got that, but she's never been particularly interested in sort of designing or cutting clothes herself, which is something that I found myself way more interested in. I originally actually was interested mostly in sort of streetwear and footwear when I was like 11, 12. A friend at school introduced me to Supreme and stuff, and so from then it sort of evolved naturally into realising I wanted a thing, not being able to afford it, and then just thinking, okay, well I could make a sort of iteration of it, make a different version of it. And so I've got two older sisters, and I'd be taking all of their older clothes that I'd been handed down but would never have worn otherwise, and cutting those things up and turning them into new things. And it started out really, really messily, but as it always would. And so from that I'd sort of realised that, if I bring it in here and let it out there, then it's going to fit better. And actually if I design this all beforehand, then it'll be far more likely to fit me properly. And so I spent sort of, 4 or 5 years, or maybe 3 or 4 years, making things just for myself, making one-off pieces. And each piece would oftentimes include a technique that I wanted to learn. And so I might have seen the technique in a pattern cutting book, or just seen it online and wanted to try and copy it, or just realise, that might be an interesting thing, like in a sketch. How can I then actually develop a technique in order to create this? And so then it all sort of evolved really naturally, in that I'd learn what I needed to in order to create the pieces. And so from one piece to the next, it's been really nice seeing a progression in skill, actually. And you can really quite easily sort of track that by looking back through in chronological order. But this sort of started culminating into proper collections, or proper deliberate pieces rather than just one-offs, because I had just been making them when I was sort of 14, 15 to sneak into London Fashion Week. And so I'd have various different, I'd just come to London. I'm from Oxfordshire, I'm from a little village, and in order to sort of escape that very quaint country life, I'd want to come to London and meet up with friends from Instagram and stuff like that. And so I'd hear about an event that I didn't have a ticket to and be like, okay, well, I'll make it look that's good enough that I supposedly look like I should be in it, and then I'll just go and try and blag my way in on the door. And that actually worked the majority of the time, almost all of the time. But a couple years ago, 2 years ago now, I started going along with friends to proper events and meeting more people actually in the industry, and one day ended up at the Dazed 30th anniversary party, and they'd taken over the whole of 180, and so including Reference Point. And so I'd snuck into the party with a friend, then got introduced to the people at Reference Point, chatted with them, got introduced to Kazim Kutai, who's the founder of New Currency, and then within half an hour of meeting him, he asked me to make a capsule to feature in the next collection, in the next magazine. And so then from there it's been 3 capsules now. So that was the first one, called The Prince, which was made for issue 2 of New Currency, and then Reference Point invited me last February to present during their sort of alternative fashion week. And so I showed another capsule collection of 3 looks and then 2 from The Prince. And now they've invited me again, and so in a couple of days now, showing second full capsule, which is Parlour Games.
Nice. Can you tell me more about the show? Because I think the show idea I told you on Instagram is really interesting. And so can you talk about more what people should expect at the show, how it will look, what's the layout, what's the idea?
So it all started with, a lot of my inspiration actually comes from literature, but not deliberately. I never go out and look for inspiration. I'm kind of opposed to that, actually. I think that it's far more interesting if it comes naturally, and it's just sort of the media and the imagery and the content that you're naturally interacting with in life, because then it's going to ingrain itself subconsciously, and then you'll process it more naturally, and I think it will come out being a more natural piece at the end of it. And so this collection started a lot with literature, with books that really focused on sort of spaces as the main character, and the characters themselves actually being just sort of elements of this space. So sort of the smoky bars of Baldwin's Another Country, or Patrick Modiano's Kafka Was the Rage, which is this really beautiful memoir of Greenwich Village in the 1950s in New York, and sort of the artist culture there, and how it really feels like all of these artists were just making up the space, but the space is the thing that was really living. And then I started thinking also about, like how people can be brought together by spaces, and another book was In the Cafe of Lost Youth, which is a really beautiful sort of like, almost reads like a memoir, but it is fiction, of this vague, timeless Parisian cafe bar, maybe anywhere between sort of the 40s and the 80s, and these different characters that would interact with each other there. And so I started thinking a lot about characters in bars, but also realising that Reference Point itself is really one of these spaces. So it's a library, bookshop and bar, but you end up with really interesting characters going there and returning into this sort of, chosen community. If you can sort of choose your own family, and this is the people that naturally congregate there. And so looking at Ref as inspiration point, and looking at the characters that I find there already, and realising that rather than making a collection that's purely fictitious or purely sort of, drawing from abstract ideas, I select people specifically. And so for this collection, rather than a runway, it's going to be sort of recreating Reference Point, but also an amalgamation of like the cafes that you find in Brassai's photos of 1920s Paris, and also of Nan Goldin's New York in the 60s, and then London in the 80s and 90s, and then also modern day London with Reference Point. And so sort of an amalgamated, vague, timeless, but also hopefully really timely bar that's sort of a fictional version of Reference Point put back into Reference Point. And so for the night, rather than a runway, we're just having the models be characters in this bar, be the regulars in this bar, and they'll be sat about drinking and going about their normal routine, playing cards or typing or reading poetry or drawing, or drinking or just reading, whatever. And so the audience will be able to be another customer within this bar, but then be able to see these regulars in their own little world and observe them, and almost interactive theatre, and that you don't necessarily quite know if you can speak to them, if they're a normal customer, or if they're part of the show, or whether you should interact with them, but then that's up to the audience to decide. So it'll be interesting as a study of how people interact with theatre as well, of watching the audience and whether anyone's bold enough to go up and speak to the models, whether they feel like it's a show and they need to be separate to it, but sort of wanting to break down the line between it being a runway and an audience, because I think it's also really lovely to show that you can actually wear the clothes.
Yeah, what I find it interesting is, so what a lot of designers do when they want to create a world based on their inspiration, like John Galliano does this perfectly, where he will create the set to really reimagine what the idea is, but then it's still a runway show though. Mm-hmm. Like his most recent show was kind of like that, where the set was made specifically to bring you in that sort of world of just people that are in this underground club, doing what they're doing. But they weren't clubbing though. They were still walking like it's a runway. So what you're doing is really interesting, because you're actually making the characters come to life through the show, rather than creating the set as much as you can and then still that being in a medium of a runway show.
I think you could look at it as, like, a lot of designers will start with a concept of a collection first and then fit it onto models, or fit it onto people, or fit it onto a show, rather than having them both evolve naturally. But the way that this started was, it wasn't with specific references or with visual, like with various imagery or mood boards. I don't do those. It was starting with a list of archetypes of characters that you might find in a bar, and then it actually ended up evolving naturally into, okay, I actually don't need to go super imaginative with these archetypes. I can just look at the people that are already there. So we've got like the hesitant poet, or the countrywoman, or just the twins, and then there are some fictional ones as well, like the drunken general, like imagining you might find him in the corner of a bar. That was actually a character sort of directly drawn from George Orwell's Down and Out in Paris and London. And when he's in Paris, one of the bars across his hotel, every night the man stands up on his table and rants to the cafe and passes out drunk and gets carried upstairs by his wife, and then does it again the next night. But imagining that of just the sort of the general sleeping in the corner. But because of that, it's creating looks around the models rather than finding models to fit the looks. And everything's made bespoke to the models as well, which has been really nice of, sort of tailor-made, not just in measurements, but also in concept.
So in your work, you very much don't want to force narratives onto people. You want people to be able to sort of exist within the world and also interact with the clothes in the way that they want to. Can you talk more about kind of that idea that comes through in your work?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like with so many runway shows and just collections as a whole, designers often talk about narratives and about storytelling. But I think the problem with that is that it's quite prescriptive of here's a specific story and you either adhere to it or you don't. And so in terms of both marketing and sales, but also in terms of actually like connecting with a customer on a sort of more emotional level, which a more sincere level, it really narrows down who feels like they can actually connect with it. And so I feel like a lot more important than specific narratives is world building, and creating worlds that you want to see exist and you want to see other people existing within. Which is what's really lovely about this collection, I think, is that it starts with, in the same way that the books that I mentioned earlier don't focus on specific characters, it's just that the characters build up the place as a whole. This is almost doing the same, of these characters build up this fictional bar as a whole, and the audience can then interact with that as they like. They can go about and speak to the models as they like, or they could choose to not speak to them and act as if it purely is a showcase, and they can go up and act like they're mannequins, or they could speak to them in person and act like they're just regulars at a bar. And so again, it's up for the audience and as such the consumer to choose. But also in terms of storytelling versus world building, by creating this world, people can choose to live within it, but choose how they want to present themselves within that, and choose what elements they like about it, and sort of create their own narratives rather than having to adhere to one. Or feeling like when they buy into it, they're buying into a specific story, a specific narrative, which I think can be, less freeing than the other way around. Yeah. So this is one of the looks rather. There's trousers underneath here as well, but with the shirt, the jacket, everything's one look. This archetype started out as the hesitant poet or the student, but honestly, I actually am not particularly interested with telling the audience what the archetypes are, because the idea is that as you would in a normal bar, you could go in and people watch and you can come up with the stories for these people yourself, come up with sort of how they got there and where they've come from and everything. But with this jacket, it's English wool from Yorkshire, which is really lovely to use, but also with deer bone buttons that I hand carved myself. So I found a deer carcass near my mum's house in the countryside that was almost all bones already. And so taking this, and also for these ones down here, which is really lovely, to end up having a more natural impact, and all of this with functional pockets on the inside. And I love little details, so there's what could be a pencil or a cigar pocket there, and also on this side there's a sort of wallet pocket on the inside. On the back, I'm really interested in sort of cuts and improvised tailoring, and so taking it and turning a dart into the vent on the back, and same with here, sort of playing with shapes of having this being able to come over is really lovely. I'm working with a jewellery designer for this collection as well, called Carrick O'Donnell, and so he and I have developed, and he's been creating these beautiful brass and silver hooks, which we're using as sort of feature buttons. So although the rest of these are mother of pearl, up on the end here there's going to be this brass hook that will come down, and so you can hook the buttonhole through it, so you'll be able to see those properly at the show. And so in a few places that'll be used. We've also got another look which started out with the archetype being the drunken general, but again which people can decide as to how they like. So it's Italian wool with also this bulk boucle, and so making it sort of a full double-breasted, but it allows for lots of different buttoning, which is really interesting, I think, and playing around with points versus sort of straight edges on the bottom, and the fit of sleeves and cuffs, and making different features. And on the shirt as well, we've got hand embroidered monogram of the AB logo. So all of this work done by myself in here at this desk. So that's sort of 3 or 4 hours of hand embroidery just for a pocket that most people won't see on the night of the show, but it's still worth doing, I think. And the shirt's also interesting in that I developed it for wearing it with a cravat underneath, and so you actually can't do up the collar of the shirt. It's permanently open at the neck, and so it's designed to be worn with a cravat underneath, and so you'd have the cravat, then the shirt, and then the collar of the jacket then slots on over the top of that all, and so you can end up with these different layers of different fabrics and angles and textures, which can be really interesting. We've got matching shorts for this as well, so you'll see the model on the night and sort of see how it's fitted to each model. And then we've also got a few different looks in pure silk. So we've got this matching with this. So these are for two twins that are wearing similar jackets with a similar technique that I developed a couple seasons ago, with taking this dart and sort of gathering it in the middle and making what I call an exploded dart, but similar cuts while still being fairly different. So on this jacket, which is still in development now, it still needs to be hand sewn together on the edges, we're going to have Carrick's brassware again, or rather this will be in silver for the hooks coming in here, and so the jacket will fasten over the top like that, and there'll be matching skirts for both of them, and where this one is coming together and buttoning over it like that, so playing around with different shapes and angles. But I think a lot of this came about from the twins, from having known them. They used to live in the building that I live in now. I could see their window from mine, and so I've met them from living here, and so they're characters within my own life, and they're characters themselves, characterful people. And so, I mean, the colours were sort of decided by their personalities, which was interesting, and just sort of what felt right to create to each person. And although they're twins, having different body shapes has been really interesting for creating garments that actually suit them and fit them properly. And so doing lots of fittings with each model has been really nice, rather than creating a set look of maybe what I could have done, sort of double the amount of looks in a standard size and then found models that fit those, but instead starting with the models in order to actually sort of almost collaboratively, although they don't necessarily know it, develop the looks, develop the pieces, really make it around their bodies and around their personalities, which is really interesting. Especially since at the moment the way that this is all funded is through bespoke work, through client work, and so every single piece is in relation to the client, and so changes slightly. Even if they've seen a piece that they liked, they'll come in and want certain bits changed, or I'll suggest certain alterations depending on how I think it would fit them, and so each piece ends up being different, which can be a really interesting process. So this is a piece that we're currently working on at the moment, with the patterns all cut now. We've done fittings, we've done everything like that. Obviously it would be a different process with making a piece actually for the client. It would be more fittings with the final garment, but for the sake of time, since I only have a matter of days left, we've just taken the alterations from the toile that we've created, and then taken all of those alterations and turned them into the final garment. But that still includes a lot of very loose tailoring, in that for the sake of time, but also I'm self-taught, and so this is almost improvised tailoring techniques. I do what I find works. It may not necessarily be right, but it achieves an end result that I'm fairly happy with. What's nice as well, with every collection I'm learning new techniques, and so it's almost I have to stop myself from wanting to improve each piece more, because by the time it's finished I'm so much better at those techniques that are involved in that piece that I want to redo it. But if you get stuck in that cycle, you'd never put anything out, and so I have to limit myself to, okay, this piece is done, I know in the future I can do it better, but here it is for now. But this is all coming together nicely. I've got pockets to put and everything like that, but it all starts from fairly natural sketches. This is actually from a while back, or actually I'm not sure the sketchbook's here, but we've got various different sketches in here coming from a while ago. So this is one of the looks that we've got to finish. So the toile's all done, but need to deconstruct that, turn it back into a pattern, and then cut it out, interface it, sew it together, get the buttons on, everything like that. But various different sketches to sort of develop these pieces. Here's one of the final looks, which is the countrywoman. So this is going underneath this jacket. But it will be nice as well through the night, through the course of the evening of the show. The models will be able to choose when they want to take off their jackets, and so the audience will have to stick around if they want to see the jacket on or the jacket off or just the shirt or whatever. But it also allows them to go up and see the pieces up close, because we're going to have a coat hanger there, and so the models can take off their coat and hang it on the back of their chair, or hang it up on the coat hanger, and the audience could go up and see the pieces up close and see how they're constructed and see the details on there, which is a really nice thought for me, because I feel like so many times so much work is put into a runway show and you see it for 30 seconds from a distance and then it's gone. But with these pieces, as with the deer bone buttons, we're also going to be having oyster shells being the buttons, and so I'm yet to drill the holes through them, but for both this jacket I plan on using them, and for another jacket, for the sketch artist jacket, so working with the colours of that and just the natural shapes, and so a combination of organic but also man-made objects within one garment I think will be really interesting to see. Some more final sketches figuring out the collar shape and everything like that. But we've also got for this collection focusing more again on the sort of handcraft of it, and one-off, and seeing how things can change each time you do it. All of the invites for this show were inspired by the idea of meeting someone at a bar, of meeting a character at a bar. And so following that, we thought that instead of it being some formal invite on nice paper, it ought to be cohesive to the show, to the theme. And so the invite itself is just done on a napkin, just a flimsy paper napkin, but with the title of the collection, which is Barflies, stamped on in a lino stamp which I hand carved, and then each one stamped on and then handwritten out with the details, and on the back of it as well with the RSVP, each one typed out on a typewriter that my mother gave me, which is really sweet, in order to make sure that every single thing has gone through my hands, which is really nice to know. And sending them out, it's always a pleasure with every invite, but also every single piece of clothing that's done by hand is finished with the stamp of my family crest, which is, I was given the stamp by my mother and she was given it by her grandmother, but we don't know which line of the family it comes from before that, so it's sort of an ambiguous family crest, and that we don't know which line of the family it is or where it's come from, and so I feel like it can kind of work quite well for the vague anonymity of this all, and it being, people being able to make it their own. But it's quite interesting that the Latin on it, cave adsum, means beware, I am here, which is impressively ominous for a family crest, so I don't know what my family did in the past. But now everyone gets to have it on the inside of their clothing, so you can see it on there. Everything's finished off with this, which is a really nice thing for me to know.
You'd find me being brave and fine. Perhaps then you'd realize I'm still.
She walks in there, and you notice, noting the colour of the sky outside. She's saying it's a winter evening, and yet the light is pushing back against the darkness. She walks in bare, and the saxophone cries, embody the blue and let it melt into serenity. let it melt with the ice.